äratus.
Tervist kõikidele vaatajatele ja kuulajatele. Mina olen Sõdurilehe podcasti saatejuht Reames Neemre ning olete taas vaatamas Sõdurilehe podcasti. Tänane episood saab olema ka natuke teistmoodi, sest et meie külaline räägib inglise keelt, seega jätkan ka ise inglise keeles. In today's episode, we're discussing topics such as enhanced forward presence, exercises Springstorm and Steadfast Defender 24, and also we'll discuss the experiences that British troops have had serving in Estonia. And for that occasion, we have invited Brigadier Harris as our guest today. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So considering where you're from, how'd you like the weather in Estonia? How do you feel about it?
Well, at the moment, it's great. It's been a long time coming. It felt like a really long winter. But actually, for us Brits, we don't like weather that's too hot, and we love our snow, which we're losing, sadly, a lot in the UK. So Estonian weather actually brings lots of good things.
How would you describe yourself to the viewers? Who is Brigadier Harris?
Blimey. So I'm an infantry officer, I guess. In terms of my military background, I'm an infantry officer and a guardsman. So I'm a member of the Household Division back in the UK. And we do both operational service, and we also support the Royal Household with ceremonials as well. So I have the sort of honour of sometimes wearing a bearskin and sometimes carrying a rifle. So an infantryman by trade, but latterly increasingly working as the sort of strategic operational interface, and particularly here in this part of the region.
As I understand, it is your second rotation in Estonia. What brought you here in the first place, and what made you come back?
So back in 2017, it was a great opportunity for me to come to a place I've never been before, and come and be part of a mission, a new NATO mission, and I think something that was, was a really live topic at the time because of the invasion of the annexation of Crimea. So I think that professionally, it was hugely attractive to me to do something like that, which I think we all feel. And secondly, on a sort of personal family level, for me to bring my family to a new country for us was a really exciting opportunity as well. So it's kind of mixed, professional reward and sort of an exciting adventure for the family.
But on the second time around, how do you feel about coming back, or were you invited? Or
I was invited back. I don't know if I was invited back by the Estonians, but certainly the UK asked me to come back because, as you know, life has changed significantly, or the strategic context has changed significantly since the invasion of Ukraine. And NATO's plans here and our role here have changed very significantly to match the threat. And so our operation here in Estonia is going to a new level, if you like. And so I was lucky enough to be asked back to sort of set up the next phase.
Steadfast Defender 24 has now concluded. What's this exercise about?
So at a sort of very macro level, huge exercise, 90,000 troops across, I think it was 32 NATO allies.
Around that.
Yeah. So I think at a macro level, it's transatlantic reinforcement, the ability for NATO allies to project forces across the European continent in defense of the Baltics and Poland. So I think that at a very macro level, there is a strategic communication value in it. And then I think at the operational level, it was a chance for us to test our multi-domain integration, the nitty gritty of deploying a lot of forces through a lot of countries. But also to do it in nested within a NATO plan, which is not something we've done enough of really before.
What were the key lessons learned from this year's Steadfast Defender?
I think the first lesson is it's hard to do, but the second lesson is it's possible. So I think which are two really great outcomes, right? So I think a lot of positives are taken from all of those who took part in it. But importantly, like all good training, we've now got loads of things to work on.
With swift response also being a sub exercise of Steadfast Defender, being mainly the deployment of the most troops to Estonia.
Yep.
And I think other Baltic countries as well. How did that exercise go? How hard is it? And the specifics. How hard is it to mobilize that many soldiers at once?
So that was like a microcosm, if you like, of Steadfast Defender. It was sort of the end of the line of that great exercise. I think we had around 2,000 extra forces in the UK, in addition to the near 1,000 we have here deployed forward. They came from the 16th Air Assault Brigade, which is our very high readiness brigade. So it's sort of their bread and butter. It's in their DNA to pick themselves up and go to another country at very short notice. So actually, I think if you were to ask someone in their headquarters, they'd be like, easy, this is what we do. I think that the real test was for those receiving them and integrating them into a divisional design. And I think that for me was one of the really important plus points of that exercise, is how, not so much getting them here, because that's what they do, but integrating them into the wider defense plan.
On the 24th March 2022, NATO leaders agreed to significantly strengthen the alliance's longer-term deterrence and defense posture. Can you elaborate, what does NATO mean by defense posture and deterrence?
So when I first got here, I remember an Estonian colleague using your analogy of a sort of a shield and a sword, sort of block the shield and be prepared to kind of jab back with the sword. And I think, if I was to use that analogy now, it's the change to describe the change in strategy is sticking that shield right on the international border. And I think in the past, there was a sense big NATO would allow that shield to be a little bit further west or south. And so the fundamental shift for me is we're now going to a strategy of denial, that we're going to forward load enough forces in enough time to make sure that shield is right on the border. So I think that's what NATO means now by its deterrence posture.
When we think of EFP, Enhanced Forward Presence in Estonia, we mainly imagine it as a land force-based operation. How big of a role did the Air Force and Navy have during the exercises?
So we had Typhoons flying across from Finland, I believe. We had Air Force, aviation, and a naval presence too. So I'm the commander of the UK land component here. It's under Estonian operational command. So I can only really give the details of the land force, but it was multi-domain integrated.
Okay.
I would say there's more that we can do in that area, and I hope as years go by, and we're more comfortable and integrated at the land domain, we'll start folding in those other domains more.
What are the main tasks for British soldiers in Estonia separate from the exercises? So what do they do on a day-to-day basis?
Yes, I think it's the dual life for them really here in Estonia. Our guys and girls absolutely fundamentally understand the purpose here alongside Estonian soldiers to defend NATO's eastern flank. So in their minds, that is why they're here. And we have an element of our force at very high readiness to get out the gate if something awful were to happen that was not foreseen. But of course, you can't sustain that level of sort of, of readiness day in, day out. So there's another side of the coin, and that is to take the time to train, to be better at war fighting if we have to, but also wider training that they would do back in the UK as well, and also to get out and about and enjoy Estonia. So it's a sort of, I would say, on a day-to-day basis, if they're not part of that unit that's a very high readiness, they're doing one of three things: mission-specific training. A lot of that involves experimentation, innovation, taking lessons from Ukraine and working out how we can win here. Or they'll be doing sort of routine training that any soldier would do wherever they were. Or they'll be doing adventurous training, sea kayaking, mountain biking, or they'll be having a beer in Tallinn.
How do they enjoy being in Estonia? Do they like it here, or generally?
Well, they do. Of course they do. I mean, it's an amazing place to be. And for many people, it's the first time they've been here, right? So it's really exciting for them. Everyone has their own story. You know, we've got people who are separated from their wives and their husbands and their children. And so 6 months away from their family can be hard. There are some who are young single men and women for whom it's their first deployment overseas. They don't have any responsibilities back home. It's a more exciting prospect. So it's hard to say how British troops feel about being posted here in Estonia because everyone's different. But I would say at a very general level, everyone's super positive about being here.
But have you heard any like comments or stories perhaps from soldiers here that maybe just a funny story that they've encountered or...
Well, I think obviously, you Estonians are famously blunt and economical with your words, which I think we find both refreshing, but also sometimes quite surprising. So I think there's always an element of adjustment. And I think for you guys, you probably get very frustrated at just how many words we use. I'm also conscious that we have a lot of different accents. And I remember once being told that Estonians found it easier to listen to Danes speaking English than it was to listening to a Welshman or a Scotsman.
Yeah, the accents might sometimes make it hard for us to understand.
Okay, well, you have exceptional language skills. It's very enviable.
Thank you. What have been the beneficial learning experiences for the British Army in Estonia? In which areas do you believe the most has been learned?
So, I mean, there are so many positives. I mean, I should also mention we serve here alongside the French, right? So the first real positive, and this gets better and better and better every year we're here, is the chance to integrate with partner nations. So integrating with you guys, integrating with the French, with the US at times, and then Latvians. And actually we work with the Finns quite a bit as well. So our north and south sort of flanks, if you like. That ability to sort of persistently practice integrated warfare integration at a low level is absolutely invaluable. And you just can't do that by going on a training exercise once every year. So being here for 6 months and then coming back another couple of years and then another couple of years at an institutional level, that is gold dust. I think the second thing that we're learning is how to operate in the cold. You know, we had visiting the battle group this winter, seeing how they operate compared to how they operate in the summer. You know, the tactics are different, the tempo is different, the demands on the soldiers are different. And that is, again, you might get a one-shot opportunity to do that in Norway or something. But here in Estonia, you can do it, you know, week on, week out, repetitively. So the ability to, and of course, your environment, your boggy, wet, very wooded, very flat environment has huge challenges for soldiers in terms of surveillance, mobility, survivability. So I think it's the tactics, being able to train and learn the tactics, knowing that you're doing so on land, that you're here to actually defend, is extremely compelling and very rewarding and extremely good training. But also doing it with partners persistently as well has a huge added value.
How much does the land actually differ from training grounds in the UK? How do you see it?
Well, there's two bits to that. You have so many more trees that you can be a little bit more robust about how you train. I mean, it's one of the things I love. One of the many things I love about Estonia is your connection with nature and your value of nature. But you still have a pragmatic view about training as well. So, you know, our guys have enjoyed chopping down trees and building barriers. Being able to train on public land, not just on train areas, is something we cannot do in the UK either. So that is a really cool thing. And as I say, it's so flat here. For tacticians, that poses huge problems. Whereas in the UK, there's always a hill line to hide behind or some high ground to look from. And those are benefits you don't have here.
You began your career as an infantryman. What do you think of the cooperation between Estonian and British troops in the field on a platoon or company level?
Well, I think there's a huge, I hope it's mutual, but there's a huge amount of respect for the Estonian infantrymen and women. I think we have, well, it didn't take long, probably took weeks for us to realise that we'd be the ones learning over here. We have a great fighting spirit in the British Army, and we'd back ourselves in any fight. But I hope we're humble enough to recognise moments where we can learn too. And I think there's a great mutual respect between our two armies. It's a great leveler, the weather and the terrain, and you can think you're as good as you are, but when you're faced with those sort of climatic conditions, it really focuses your mind. So I think at a platoon company level, there's a level of great mutual respect, and I think probably quite a lot of competition as well.
The conscripts in the Estonian army go through multiple long hikes or ventures in mostly the winter and the summer, which are the extremes in our climate. Have the English troops also tried to take on like longer hikes?
I know we've had a go at doing it on skis, which has not always been successful. I think soldiering on skis is something actually parts of our defence are very good at, and our Royal Marines are experts at it. But again, for your and I'm one of these average British infantrymen, the idea of putting on a set of Nordic skis, with all your kit is hard. But I think when we're on our feet, we're very confident, and we've done a lot of that.
When military personnel from different countries work together, they tend to have certain misunderstandings sometimes, which are usually called cultural differences. Can you think of any cultural difference between Estonians and the English?
I don't know. I think given how culturally there are plenty of reasons why we probably shouldn't get on. Our commander in chief is a king, not a president. We have a very sort of regimental system. We like our sort of, as you know, we like our words, and maybe dare I say we probably overthink things sometimes. Whereas in Estonia, you're a republic, you are very short and sharp, and you don't overthink things. You're very good at focus, knowing what needs to be done and doing it. Your great sort of actions speak louder than words. So you would think that there would be a clash, but actually I think we're remarkably good. It works, from my point of view, it works extremely well.
Sounds great. Hope so. The largest Estonian exercise, Spring Storm, has also now concluded.
Yeah.
Were you also involved, or what part did you play in this exercise?
Well, I had the sort of the privilege or luck, if you like, of traveling around the exercise, visiting troops who were on it, and often accompanying visitors too. And I had the great privilege of accompanying your Prime Minister to go and see your troops on the exercise, which was a really cool experience. I've been in that respect. I was fortunate enough not to be bitten by mosquitoes for days and days inside the woods. I would say that next year, my headquarters and myself will have a far more integrated role in the exercise, as our headquarters takes on a warfighting role within your Estonian divisional headquarters, which will be a new development between now and next year, which I think is a really exciting and really positive step forward, and I think a reflection of how we're widening our commitment here, not just from the battle group, but that reinforcement brigade, and also all our sovereign divisional enablers too.
But did you also happen to see or follow what happened during Spring Storm? Can you maybe evaluate it somehow?
Yeah, so I think as all these big exercises do, it was an opportunity for us to start going through some of the tactical actions that we would need to do in the defence of your country. So effectively test that defensive plan under sort of conventional warfare conditions, and a chance to test all the integration. As I said, for a British Army battle group to be training on public land, to be parking your tank up on someone's garden, is a very novel experience, and it's a really rewarding one for soldiers, because they get a sense of the reality of fighting in a congested battle space with not just multinational partners, but also civilian population as well.
But did you also see Estonian troops in work? Can you maybe elaborate on this one?
I did. And I'm always incredibly impressed just by how cheerful Estonian soldiers seem to be, regardless of the sort of conditions they find themselves in. In the British Army, we often joke that if the soldiers stop complaining, something bad has gone wrong. But you guys always seem so cheerful.
Did the exercise also present any learning experiences for British troops? Did they, aside from the climate, the hot weather, and the mosquitoes?
So, I mean, as I mentioned before, the battle space management, organising ourselves on the battlefield alongside Estonians and French and other partner nations, is always going to be a mega challenge. And on exercise, you don't have the dangers of friendly fire, et cetera, but it's still something you have to prove to yourself and others that you can do. So I think that is something we need to continue to work on. On these really big exercises, there are probably larger pauses between events that on our more compressed exercises in the UK, it's just, it's rapid activity. But again, I think that's a really realistic reflection of how things often are in combat. Periods of extreme activity and then periods of rest. So I think it was really, as I've said, a really good way of training in a different way than we're used to.
How does communication in the battlefield work between different languages spoken, French, English, Estonian? Do soldiers mostly use English, or there's also the NATO certain practices used? What's the most?
So I think we're very fortunate that you all speak such good English, and our French colleagues as well. So English is the common language on the net. You guys, of course, can switch to secret and speak Estonian, which you do quite right. That is something we do not sadly have that luxury. And we understand a lot more French than we do Estonian, so they can't do that either, really. At a sort of technical level, our interoperability is getting better and better. We've got procedures in place that mean we can communicate tactically between units across national flags. We can call in fires between each other's nets. And as I said right at the beginning of this chat, for every 6 months, a year we're here, we're getting better and better and better.
Well, back to the terrain. Have you also seen other Western Europe countries? How does it compare to other countries? Not UK precisely, but
well, I think a lot of the more senior armored soldiers will remember the days from Germany where you had far larger fields of view and fields of fire. And certainly as a young officer myself, on all my tutes and exercises, when we did sort of anti-tank ambushes and the rest of it, you were dealing with far greater ranges and distances because we were in terrain that was more open and less wooded. And of course, Canada was our major training area back in the day. And so the prairies in Canada are basically like the surface of the moon. So if you think that generations of armored soldiers have been training on that terrain, and then suddenly we're asking them to operate in tight, condensed forest blocks with very few avenues of mobility corridors, it poses a completely different tactical challenge to our commanders, which as I said, which they've had years to grapple with. And already we're seeing very different tactics play out at the lower level than we would in Germany or Canada.
But considering your extensive infantry knowledge and experience, what would your recommendations, or how do you see the tactics working in the Estonian terrain? What would you do differently than we do?
Well, I think we take a lot of our lessons from you. I'm not going to say on a sort of public podcast our specific tactics, clearly. But I think when you look at what's going on in Ukraine, clearly the use of drones is a really key one. The ability to see beyond your usual horizons, but at a very tactical level, is increasingly important. I think the ability to survive both our headquarters and our combat units by dispersal, to make sure that you protect yourself long enough to be able to be effective in the first fight is obviously really important too. And this idea of get inside the kill chain, the fires and counter-fires and the primary civil artillery. So all of those things are known challenges that we've seen in Ukraine, and they're ones that we play through here in our training.
Estonian and British troops are jointly training the Ukrainian troops as well right now in the UK. Did the exercise Spring Storm give any opportunities to implement lessons learned from the Russian war with Ukraine?
So I think at Spring Storm, probably not so much. And I think everyone would accept that it's an exercise of such scale. It's very hard to insert into those very large exercises the level of nuance or new training, which is absolutely fine, because as I've said, there's a huge amount of lessons we can take from big exercises like Spring Storm anyway. But what we are doing now here in Estonia is each battle group that comes will spend a month or two focusing specifically on innovation and warfare development. So taking lessons from Ukraine, taking lessons from you, the Estonians, our French partners and others, and getting better at this new way of war. So I think those really big exercises will probably remain good opportunities to test military deployment, like we saw with 6th Air Assault Brigade, operational integration at quite a high level. And then I think it's other training opportunities that we need to take to be more specific on innovation, experimentation with new technology, for example.
On a more personal level, how would you describe yourself? Who is Harris behind the rank of brigadier?
It's exactly the same, no difference. Well, I don't know. I mean, yeah.
Do you have any hobbies, or perhaps?
Yeah, so, well, I love my surfing. So I'm very proud president of Army Surfing. And as a younger man, I used to spend most of my holidays traveling around the world surfing with my friends. So I don't get to do as much of that now because I'm a father as well. I have twin girls who are 13 and a son who's 11. And my wife is a fund manager at Headhunt. She's a recruitment consultant for headhunters. So we're quite a busy gang. No, but I love my surfing. I love my cricket and fishing. And I've really enjoyed fly fishing here in Estonia. It's got some beautiful rivers. And I've also enjoyed playing floorball, which is this like weird sport I didn't know existed. And as a field hockey player, it's a sport I've really enjoyed doing. And choir, and I've joined the Kalamaja Segakor, and I've enjoyed singing with those guys too. So I guess that's just some of the things I do.
How did you get to surfing? Is it popular in the UK?
It is, yeah. Well, I went to university in the southwest, and again in our spare time, which we had quite a lot of at university, we would bomb down the M5 and surf down on the southwest coast in Cornwall and Devon. And I just got the bug, and I just spent every week I could up until I basically got married and had children surfing.
Fair enough. Was being a soldier something you thought of at an early age, or was it something that came along later in life?
So I come from a very military family. My grandfather fought in Burma in the Second World War. He fought at the Battle of Kohima, and my uncle was a Welsh Guards officer. My other uncle was a Sea Harrier pilot in the Falklands, and my father went to the Falklands as well as a naval officer. So I have there's quite a strong service tradition in my family. So I think my brother also joined the Royal Navy. So there was always probably an inevitability that I'd become a serviceman of some description. But I had never intended to remain in the army. For pretty much from year 3, year 4, I was always planning to leave, but there just always seemed to be another reason to stay. And my career has spanned quite a busy period, and there's always just been something to keep me in.
The opportunities have stacked up.
Yes.
You have a degree in theology and religious studies from Bristol University. Has your academic background been of any use to you during your military career?
I get asked this question a lot because my degree seems to be counterintuitive to joining what is essentially a sort of destructive organization. But it's helped me hugely. My degree was comparative religion. So I studied religions from across the globe. And I think, and actually particularly Islam, both sort of contemporary Islam in Britain, but also more traditional aspects of Islam in across the Muslim world, and traveled extensively as well, including the Pakistan, the Northwest Frontier Province and other areas. So actually, when I found myself deployed in Iraq, when speaking to imams or others about security situations in the districts we were working, having a sort of foundational understanding of their culture and religion was helpful. You can never really truly understand or empathize. You can read all you like, but actually having some knowledge and some empathy goes a long way. And then, of course, in Afghanistan, a similar sort of deal. In fact, actually, even my service in Northern Ireland, wasn't uninformed by some of the theology studies I've done. So, actually, it's been really helpful.
But during your time in Estonia, have you, has the fact that most of the population in Estonia is atheists, has it had any effect on serving here? Or
no? Well, I wouldn't describe myself as a man of huge faith, actually. So I think for me, it's more about the cultural and spiritual aspects of religion that interest me and motivate me, as opposed to the sort of the specific rubric of the religion itself. Yeah. So in that respect, and I'm also a countryman, so I live in the countryside in the UK. As I say, I enjoy my fishing, I enjoy immersion in the countryside. So actually your connectivity to nature, your midsummer sort of celebrations, I find a way a sort of cultural extension of spirituality and religion anyway. So I think at that level, I can really identify with some of your culture here, out with religion.
A lot of NATO military personnel are impressed with the fact that Estonian army is a reserve army.
Yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, sometime in the past, the UK also had a reserve army kind of situation. What is the stance on it on the topic now?
So we're already a reserve army in many ways. We have about 30,000 reservists as part of our sort of one army concept. So I think reserve service is a very, very familiar thing. It used to be called the Territorial Army, now the Reserve. I think in terms of conscription, that's obviously something that's hit the press recently, and is probably above my pay grade to comment on now.
In 2015, you were a part of the Queen's birthday parade.
Yeah.
What was your role? What was that like?
So I was the technical phrase is the field officer in brigade waiting, which is a very long way of saying I was the commander of the parade. So I was on horseback in the center of Horse Guards.
Okay.
And gave the words of command for all the various, movements, ceremonial movements around the square. I had to learn to ride to do it. I didn't grow up riding, so that was quite hard actually. And it's like 130 words of command or something you have to learn off by heart to give as well. So it's quite high. It's actually one of the most high pressure things I've ever done in my military career, because it's not just the thousands of people watching you, and of course you're, in my case, our queen. But you've got trillions of people watching on television as well. And you don't want to be the guy who falls off the horse,
right? Could you think of a fact or perhaps a story that would best describe the extensive knowledge you have gained during your career in the military?
I've been in the military for 30 years, and I don't think I could think of. And there are so many, as I'm sure many soldiers would say, despite all the horrors that soldiery can bring, it's essentially a humorous activity, even in the darkest of times, right? So I've got too many stories to tell to choose one, but I would say that probably if I reflect on all the things that have amazed me, or the moments of success I've looked back on and thought, God, that was just extraordinary. It's tended to be due to the people around me. It's the people who have just done something that either picked me up and helped me, or the team that's worked around me. So this, before I did operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, I was part of an army that there was lots of banter between cap badges, between regiments, lots of banter between the army and the Air Force, and everyone liked to sort of tease each other. And I think I learned through Afghanistan in particular that none of that matters. Humans become human very quickly in those situations. And that's where the golden thread that joins all of us really becomes evident. We all join for the same reason, regardless of what organization we're part of. And I think that stands true for multinational operations as well.
When your operation in Estonia ends, what will you remember your service here by?
Well, I've still got about 8-9 months to go, so I don't know what's going to happen in the last bit. Well, I think probably a great sense of progress. I've been really fortunate to be, and I say be at the beginning because I know it's not the beginning. 2017 was just one little part of a very long journey you guys have been on for many, many years. So I'm not pretending that somehow I was at the beginning of something, but having sort of been at the start of this Forward Land Forces thing, to have the chance to come back and see how far we've come from Warsaw to now has been really, really rewarding. So I think I'll go back with a sense of real progress, but also a sense that, we've got a finite amount of time to get ready now, given the threat that may yet appear to our east. And so I have a sense now more than I ever did of this sort of imperative to really focus on the detail of fighting and winning. And I think that will be the thing I'll take back to the UK. Is we've come a hell of a long way, but now's the moment to really nail it.
And I think that's where we'll kind of conclude the podcast today. I'd like to thank you for joining us. And I'd also like to thank our viewers. And if you want to hear on specific topics or specific guests, you can comment down below. And follow us on Facebook and Spotify, Facebook and YouTube under the name Sõdurileht, and in Instagram at kaitsevägi.edf. Thank you for watching, and to the next episode.